Right now, I am in Germany, just to the south of a little town called Dassberg. And the river that you see right here behind me is the Our River. And just on the other side of the river is Luxembourg. By December of 1944, the Allied forces had pushed the Germans back to this side of the river, and they had taken up a position along what was called the Western Wall, or the Siegfried Line, this line of defenses along Germany's border. And on the other side of the river was a division that was known as the Bloody Bucket, the 28th Infantry Division, that had been completely bruised and battered up in the Hurtgen Forest and had been moved to a quiet sector to kind of rest and refit. And what they didn't know is that on December 16th, they were going to be right in the path of one of the most vicious German offensives of the entire war. Like I said, we are right here along the Our River, which forms the boundary in this area between Germany and Luxembourg. And the 28th Division was holding a line on the other side of this river that honestly was really, really thin. To the north, you had the 112th Regiment, and then in the middle was the 110th Regiment, and then to the south of us, you would have had the 109th Regiment. So where I'm at right now, just across the river, well, up here on the other side of these hills, there would have been Americans in outposts from the 110th Regiment of the 28th Infantry Division. And these poor guys had no idea what was coming for them on the 16th of December. We've moved up off of the river a little bit, and it's actually starting to rain on me. But anyway, I mentioned how the Germans had withdrawn to this side of the river to a line of defenses known as the Siegfried Line. This was a line of defenses that included bunkers and pillboxes and anti-tank obstacles and dragon's teeth, things like that. And there's actually a bunker of the Siegfried Line that is right here. Now, it took me a second to find this, because as you can see, like, it looks like just a bunch of nasty brush right now. But right up here, underneath this vegetation, well, you can see part of one of these German bunkers that was right here covering this section of the line. Now, there's no way to get in it, obviously. Like I said, this whole thing has been nearly covered up. Now, whether that was a wartime thing or post-war, I honestly don't know. Well, obviously, it's been covered up considerably post-war, but there may have been some camouflage that was put in during the war itself. So from right here, I'm assuming that this bunker would have been angled in this direction. So the river crossing at the town is right up here. And yeah, I don't know what gun was in this bunker or anything, but my hypothesis is that it was covering this section of the line. Now, prior to the Battle of the Bulge, this was a pretty quiet sector. I mentioned that the 110th Regiment of the 28th Infantry Division is going to have outposts just right here on the other side of the river. And there's a pretty funny story that John McManus talks about in his book Alamo and the Ardennes, where the general of the 28th Infantry Division, Norman Dutch Coda, was visiting some of the outposts, and these guys could see each other. So he looks out and he sees a German, I think if I remember correctly, by one of these bunkers, and he asked a soldier, he said, "Hey, do you see that German out there?" And he says, "Yeah." And he said, "Are you going to shoot him?" And he says, "Well, sir, if I shoot at him, he might shoot back." So it was kind of quiet along here all the way up until what the Germans called Operation Watch on the Rhine was going to be unleashed. And in this sector, one of the first divisions to cross was going to be the 2nd Panzer Division. At about 4 o'clock on the 16th, the engineers formed a couple of bridge crossings, or one right around here, and that was going to get armor over onto the other side of the river. So standing here, you can only imagine what it must have looked and sounded like in the early morning hours of December 16th when this massive German artillery barrage just started hammering the American lines here on the other side of this river. Now, for the Germans, the success of this operation was going to depend on surprise and speed. The surprise part, they definitely had down. And if you move west from where we are right now, well, you get to the massive road network at Bastogne, which has become kind of synonymous with the Battle of the Bulge. Well, before the Germans in this area could get to Bastogne, well, they had to move through the 28th Division. And for the 110th Regiment, their headquarters was in the town of Clairvaux. So right now we're going to hop in the car and we're gonna make our way along the same route that the 2nd Panzer Division had their route, and go to the town of Clairvaux. We've now moved west to the town of Clairvaux, which you can see down in this valley behind me. And Clairvaux served as the regimental headquarters for the 110th Infantry Regiment of the 28th Division. It was commanded by a guy named Hurley Fuller. Now, prior to the Ardennes offensive, there was obviously a buildup over along the Siegfried Line. And there was a sergeant in B Company by the name of J.J. Kuhn, who, him and his men had been observing all these troop movements. They were seeing vehicles that were moving back and forth. So they were like, man, something is up here that does not look right. Reported it, and Fuller kind of waved it off. And he said, it's, I need more evidence. So this made Sergeant Kuhn, who didn't care for Fuller very much, kind of angry. So they went down to the Ur River along the bank, and this is kind of nasty, but they found some used toilet paper and some excrement from some of the Germans who had been there using it as a literal dumping ground. And they were like, okay, well, here's some proof. So they got some paper, picked up the excrement, and had it sent back to regimental headquarters, where it was put in a manila envelope and labeled Exhibit 1. And reportedly, Fuller was not too fond of that. But on the 17th, there had already been some fighting that had taken place on the 16th. 28th was holding off the Germans. But on the 17th, the Germans reached the town of Clairvaux. We're standing currently on the southern end of town, facing kind of to the north. And right here at this cemetery, well, as you can see with the cars going by and the road, there's some pretty sharp turns getting down into Clairvaux. And on the 17th, this is right about where the German advance had checked up. They had, come across the river and had made their way past a high road called Skyline Drive and got to this point. And there were a couple of Panzer Mark IVs that had been knocked out and were blocking the road. And also they were using this high ground to fire in on Americans who were taking refuge and defensive positions in some of the buildings here in town, including, most notably, this one right here. This is Clairvaux Castle. So there was a group from Headquarters Company of the 28th Division, 110th Infantry Regiment, that kind of barricaded themselves in that castle. And the Germans, they didn't have orders to go into town yet. So again, like I said, they kind of checked up right here and were using this as a position to fire into the Americans in town. Before we go into town, I want to cross the road here and show one quick thing. Look both ways, play a little bit of Frogger. Oh my gosh, here comes a car. All right, so let's get across here. And just as you are coming into town, they have here at this hairpin curve a German Pak 4341. So this is an anti-tank gun. It's probably the most powerful anti-tank weapon that the Germans had. Fired an 88 millimeter shell. Now, the history behind this particular gun is unknown, but what we do know is that it was found somewhere in the area here, and like I said, was an absolute vicious and formidable weapon. Yeah, a couple dents in it. I don't know if that's wartime dents or a post-war dent. But there you go. One of the weapons that was used somewhere around here during the Ardennes offensive. I've now moved over to the west side of town, and by midday on the 17th, the 5th Panzer Army commander, Hasso von Manteuffel, who was charged with going through this part of the line and getting to Bastogne, had a problem on his hand. He was originally slated to be in Bastogne by midday on the 17th, and by midday on the 17th, he hadn't even made it through Clairvaux. A lot of house-to-house fighting was happening right here in town, and the guys from the 28th were holding out as best they could, but they were just getting swamped from all directions by the men from the 5th Panzer Army. And Manteuffel wasn't the only one who had a problem. The one who had a bigger problem, arguably, was Colonel Fuller. Right here along this stretch of road, there is a monument that I would imagine a lot of people drive by and don't even know that it's here. And it is a monument to the commander of the 110th Infantry Regiment of the 28th Infantry Division, Colonel Hurley E. Fuller. So here you can see we've got this little plaque right here to Colonel Fuller. And the reason that this particular monument is right here is because, well, we are right across the street from the Clairvaux Hotel, which served as the command post for Fuller and the 110th Infantry Regiment. And again, it appears that we've arrived on a day when there is some construction being done to this building. Now, on the 17th, things were getting pretty hectic right here in this spot. This building was coming under machine gun fire and mortar fire. There was a Panzer that got right up to the building and just started firing into it with its main gun and with its machine guns, and it honestly got to where it was too much. So Fuller decided that it was time to get the heck out of Dodge. Now, things were so hot down here on the street that trying to get out through the front door was going to be a little bit too hazardous. And as you can see, this hotel is built right up against this rocky cliff. Well, up on the 3rd floor, there was a fire escape of sorts that was really just a ladder that went across to the other side. So Fuller and some of the men in the command post managed to get out and make their way to safety. There were others inside who were either killed or wounded or captured. But yeah, right here was the command post for the 110th Infantry Regiment right here in Clairvaux. And even though they were making it out to fight another day, well, in town there was still a group of men from the headquarters company who were holding out at the castle. We've made our way up now to the castle here in Clairvaux. And during the battle, there was an element of men from the headquarters company of the 28th Infantry Division who barricaded themselves inside this building and were really causing a problem for the Germans. So after Fuller and his element had moved out and a lot of the 28th had fallen back on the 17th, on the 18th, there were still men holding out in this castle fighting against this onslaught of Germans that was sweeping through Clairvaux. Here in this castle, it wasn't just men from the 28th Infantry Division who were holding out and seeking protection within the walls of this fortress. There were also civilians who were in this building. There were also some German prisoners that were being held by the Americans that were in this building. And even though we've talked about the 28th Division quite a bit, there's another element that was here in Clairvaux that honestly has gone pretty unrecognized for their role in the Battle of the Bulge, at least the early stages of it, and that's the 9th Armored Division. And if you look right here, well, there's a plaque that reads, "This U.S. Sherman M4A3 of Company B, 2nd Tank Battalion, 9th Armored Division, is the only known surviving combat vehicle of the division put out of action on December 17th, 1944, while defending Clairvaux here at the gate to the castle." Well, as you might notice, well, there's no tank, but there are some chairs and tables that you can kind of hang out at where the tank used to be. The tank was sent off for restoration and has just recently returned to Clairvaux, but is not here at this location. Well, I stepped down below the castle to take a look at the place where the tank that used to be up there was relocated, and as is the case with most places that I go, which are either under construction or closed for whatever reason, they have the tank from Combat Command R Reserve of the 9th Armored Division behind this plastic that is waiting for a big reveal at some point. So anyway, we can at least see part of the turret and the barrel of the tank, and if we were able to get up there and take a closer look for ourselves, you could see some of the battle damage from the tank. But anyway, if you come to Clairvaux and you want to see the tank, Well, right here's its new home. We've just moved into the inner walls of the castle here. And I mean, just looking at this structure and looking at all of the windows that you could shoot out of, I mean, any German who's going to try and come through that gate right there is going to have a bear of a time trying to get into the inside of this castle. So for the men who were in this structure, they could honestly hold out as long as their supplies held out. But obviously it's not a video game, so the supplies were eventually going to run out. And also, even though the walls are made of stone, the roof is not. So the castle today serves as a museum here in Clairvaux that honors the service of the men who fought here. So we're going to go and take a look inside and yeah, see what they've done with the place. All right, we just got into the museum here, and I can already tell that I'm going to like this place. There are just a ton of artifacts that were all locally sourced. So here, looking at some U.S. armored gear, and then they have quite a few German items too. So here you can see a couple of German soldiers looking at a map. So there's all kinds of examples of like uniforms here and weapons and just a lot of gear that you wouldn't even typically think of. So, I mean, there's just way too much to point out. And then if we look over here, we see a couple of guys who have obviously being shown having left their tank, one helping out a wounded soldier. But yeah, this is cool. Moving now down into the lower level of the castle. Now, during the battle itself, there were civilians who were down here taking refuge from the fighting outside, and now they've turned it into this really cool diorama. So here we see an American who is being taken prisoner. Another scene over here of a German medic treating an American wounded soldier. And then you just have these other various scenes of German soldiers with all of the gear that they would have worn during this period of time. Yeah, so these are all things that help to bring it to life for us a little bit more. So here's a couple of Panzerfausts. Wow. Yeah, this is really well done. Now, of course, one of the things that really defined the Battle of the Bulge was just the extreme cold and snow that these guys had to fight in. So here in this diorama, we see some American soldiers who are camouflaged up. In a lot of cases, they would go into towns and request bed sheets or anything that they could get to, put over their helmets or over their uniforms in order to camouflage themselves up a little bit. We got this guy here with his Thompson submachine gun, another one of the iconic weapons from World War II. And then they have a few other soldiers depicted here. So we have this German soldier who has been killed, and another soldier here in the back trudging through the snow, and then a couple other guys here getting a bazooka loaded up. Yeah, man, I've loved what they've done with this museum. Well, as is the case with many places that I go, I shut the camera off, and as I was coming out of that last room, I just smoked my head right there on that low ceiling. I mean, hit it hard, which is, of course, not uncommon. But anyway, I'm going to go ahead and make our way to the top floor here. And yeah, it looks like we've got another room that is just pack loaded with artifacts and uniforms and gear and all kinds of interesting stuff. So here we got uniforms of a Luftwaffe pilot and an SS soldier, showing us what they might have looked like during the Battle of the Bulge. And then got a few more weapons here, and by a few I mean just a ton. Got a US 50 caliber machine gun here. Another set of uniforms donated by veterans, one from the 83rd Division, one from the 80th, and one from Field Artillery of the 3rd Army. Yeah, we even got some ration boxes here. Yeah, this is absolutely great. And then we got someone from the 82nd Airborne depicted here. Now, one thing that we have to keep in mind as we're going through this museum is that this castle was a fortress that was being used by U.S. soldiers. So as we go through these little passageways and halls and rooms and stuff like that, well, this is where the headquarters company was fighting it out on December the 17th of 1944. As a matter of fact, that cemetery that we were at just a little bit ago, where I said the Germans kind of checked up and were firing into town, well, looking out this window, you can see exactly where that was. I just walked into this room here, and good grief, if you are into miniatures and dioramas, I would have to think that you would find this pretty impressive. My sister-in-law is really into, like making miniatures of things and stuff like that, so she'd be greatly disappointed if I didn't show this. But this is a diorama of Clairvaux, and man, I don't know how many hours went into making this thing, but I've got a feeling it was more than a few. This is honestly really, really impressive. And I don't know, I'm guessing this is probably, maybe 8 feet by 10 feet, maybe even more. Okay, so, oh wow, look here, we even got a little cutout to where we can see inside the hotel. Man, this is cool as heck. Huh. Here's another miniature that they have in this room of Clairvaux Castle. And again, just very, very impressive. I haven't really talked about the history of this building. The history of the Clairvaux Castle goes back to 1129. Just something that the American mind can't comprehend, just buildings this old. Where, if we have something that's 100 or 150 years old in America, I mean, we think that's old. This goes all the way back to the 12th century. And over time, it's been added onto, and parts have been torn down. It served as a residence. I read that it also served as part of it served as a prison at one point. But in December of 1944, it was a fortress for the headquarters company of the 28th Infantry Division. We've made it back outside, and I mentioned earlier how the men who were inside of this castle could hold out as long as their supplies held out. The other vulnerability to this castle was the roof. So the Germans just hammered the walls of this castle with gunfire and artillery and everything else. The walls held up. The roof, well, the roof, not so much. It caught fire, and inside the Americans started entertaining the possibility of surrendering. So it was, after some debate, they decided to go ahead and surrender, and a sergeant by the name of Kussner volunteered to be the first one out, which of course was going to be a very risky thing to do. So he got a German prisoner in front of him and was using him as a bit of a human shield, came out, surrendered. The rest of the men came out, and there was this tense moment where they didn't know if they were going to get cut down or not, because they had killed a lot of guys here. So they noticed the German prisoner talking to the colonel who had accepted the surrender. The colonel then told them, "My intention was to shoot all of you." He said, but the German prisoner had told him that they had treated all of the prisoners well inside the castle during the battle, when they could have very easily and conveniently shot them. He said, since you treated these men so well, well, now you're going to be prisoners of the Third Reich. So that would start a pretty long and arduous ordeal for them, but at least they were still alive. All right, well, that was a little bit from Clairvaux Castle and the museum, which, if you're ever in Clairvaux, definitely stop and visit this museum. It was really, really incredible, and as always, I didn't show a fraction of what they had in there. I've got one more thing that we're going to take a look at before we leave Clairvaux today. I've moved just a short distance away from the castle, and placed prominently here in town is this monument to the U.S. soldiers who served as liberators in this area during the Battle of the Bulge. So if we look down at the base of this memorial, you can see it says, "To our liberators, 1944 to 1945. And there I'm seeing representation from the 26th Infantry Division, the 28th, the Bloody Bucket, who was here and absorbed this massive blow from the Germans at the front end of the Battle of the Bulge. I'm also seeing there's the 87th Infantry Division, the 90th, the 4th. I'm seeing the different armored divisions, like the 4th, the 6th, the 10th, the 11th. Okay, all of these different divisions played a role in bringing liberty to this area. Now, I like this monument as it is alone, but what really puts it over the top for me is this extra element that they've added on this building right here. Here we see these citizens of Luxembourg who are crowding this window and cheering and waving a flag to thank their liberators who have come through and fought and died so that they might be free from Nazi tyranny. Yeah, that is really incredible. I mentioned earlier how with the Battle of the Bulge, a lot of focus gets placed on the 101st Airborne at Bastogne. But people often overlook or forget that that perimeter that was formed at Bastogne came at a heavy cost. The 28th Infantry Division, which had been heavily bloodied at the Hürtgen Forest, was pretty much destroyed and sacrificed here in the Ardennes in order to buy a little bit of time for the 10th Armored and the 101st to get to Bastogne and form a perimeter. But anyway, that was a little bit from right here in Luxembourg at Clairvaux.